My goal is to speak in clear English sentences. Hello, I'm Paul Johnston. My life as a child was very interesting, but very hard. I was born all the way in California, in LA. It's The city may be covered in smog, but it is rich in cultural activities. There were movies, plays, a lot of different cultural events for me. I was exposed to many different ideas. My parents, they were both hearing, so communication was hard. We would write to communicate back and forth. But I will say that my parents were very motivated, and they sent me to different places so that I could have a lot of different cultural exposure. The vocabulary itself I wasn't too keen on, but I was creative and the ideas I understood. Communication was very hard and always a problem. But growing up, I didn't realize that. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. I was an only child. I was a very creative child, though. My real brothers were my toys. I loved my toy soldiers. I would set them up and have a war. I became the commander, and I was in charge. I would set up their camps, and I would have them play. And that play really helped me to be independent and decide what I wanted to do. Growing up, I never realized that I was a deaf person. I never realized that I was handicapped. I had the same features as everybody else. I have eyes, I had a tongue, I had teeth, the same as other people. I always saw that there were many hearing people, and I always thought that when I grew up, I became hearing. Because at that point, I had never really seen anybody that was deaf. All of my friends were hearing, and they were all quick learners. But I was slow and I really had to study. So every night I would go home in the mirror and I would practice and practice and practice. I never got it. Finally, one time, I can't remember what happened, but my neighbor, they were teaching me, my friend was teaching me numbers 1 through 10. And my friend was so excited, yes, you got it. And I was absolutely happy. Finally, I could talk. So I went to my neighbor's house. Went to my neighbor's house and their parents. And all right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was exhausted, but they were so proud of me. That's when I realized that there were obstacles. They were excited that they could teach a deaf person. Growing up, I understand it was important. I understand important values. And I decided that I was going to go to college. And college really helped me to understand who I am. Because there were a few certain required classes I had to take that finally helped me realize who I was as a deaf person. And these classes were all related to deafness. And that just hit me that I was deaf. That's when I realized that I was a deaf man. Growing up, I knew that I wanted to work, but I wasn't sure what. But I knew that I wanted to be something related to creativity, something artistic with the arts. Drawing, painting, acting, everything related. The problem was my attitude, and I always said can't. Can't. That was a big part of my vocabulary, and I was always told, you can't. You can't, you can't, you can't. I had the hunger, but I couldn't. And I just accepted that, and I was isolated. But there were a few people, my favorite teacher, my first teachers, my two teachers, both had their doctorates, and there was another student that really helped me. That really helped me believe that I could do anything, and that it was all right to be a deaf person. And I wanted to be like that. I didn't need that cant attitude. So I decided that the negative vocabulary words and being isolated, I was going to get rid of that. And there were always going to be and I realized that there were always going to be obstacles. And if I couldn't hear, that was fine. I can still do what I needed to. People thought that because I was deaf, I was dumb. That was an attitude that I didn't have to accept. I finally learned that those obstacles that bother me, I show them that I can do it. I can get through anything. Any obstacle, I can bust through. So I kept going. I realized that growing up that my life's, when I finally grew up, I realized that my life's work was dependent on the decisions I made. And I went to Rochester, New York, in college, in TID. There's also a school for the deaf there. And I went to the hearing classroom, and I had an interpreter. And seeing the interpreter also really hit me hard too. And there were many students that didn't know deaf culture, didn't have time for it, didn't understand. But that's all right. So there were all kinds of obstacles that I had to overcome with learning how to navigate through that with a healthy attitude and getting through all those negative stereotypes about deaf culture and deaf people. And the more that I was able to work through some of these, through some of my issues, that gave me more confidence, and I could trust my intuition and my gut, and I knew what I could do. Before graduation, before going to in TID, my whole life, growing up in the deaf community, the deaf school, all deaf people, they communicate with each other, they have their language, they have their own cultural norms. I had to decide what world I was going to live in. Was I going to live in the hearing world or in the deaf world? And after graduation, what was I going to do? I was graduating soon, so I had to figure that out. So I had to think about, who am I as an artist? Who am I as a person? And I decided that I was going to go to Penn State University. Before going to school, I had in the fall, my senior year, that's when I started, that's when I started to be independent. I was going to make my own life decisions. I wasn't going to take any help from other people. So I go to the library and I look at different magazines, different books about colleges. And I decided, what's best for me? What can I do? And that was a really good experience for me, and again, helped me to be an independent person. And after I graduated, I applied to 8 colleges, and I thought, maybe if I apply to 8, that'll be safe. Maybe 1 will accept me and 7 will reject me, and I at least have 1. And so I graduated, and I got into more colleges than what I'd realized. So that actually made my choice harder, because now I had more options. But it was good. And I decided that I was going to major in furniture design and woodwork. People didn't understand why I picked that major, but I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to have fun, and I wanted to enjoy myself. I didn't want to go to school just for better education. I wanted to go to school to become a better person, to have a healthy attitude. Before I took those required courses, before I took psychology, all the problems I was having after I took that, psychology explained it. And I found out that I wasn't the only person who had that experiences, that had that experience. Every single person experiences emotions, black, Jewish, deaf, whatever it is, we're all the same. I learned that the hearing world and deaf world are both, everyone in both of those worlds are humans, even though our experiences are different. And even though there are differences, we all have our similarities. That was important for me. I told my deaf friends that I was going to go to Penn State. They absolutely could not believe that I was going to go, and I was told it was going to be quite the challenge, and that I was going to be in the hearing world with no deaf, no signing, no communication, that my life was going to go upside down. But their life was different than mine. Their whole world was a deaf community, and that wasn't quite my experience. And I wanted to test myself. I wanted to challenge myself. Could I make it as a deaf man in the hearing world? Can I make friends? Can I survive? But I always like to challenge myself. And when I was in there, something I learned at Penn State was that there really is a deaf community in the hearing world, and that's possible. Most people have no idea about deaf culture, and the deaf community has its own, and that the deaf community has its own culture, and they very much have a negative attitude. I always carried a notepad and a pen in my paper so that I could always communicate with a hearing person. It was my responsibility to take care of myself, and that would help me. As I was walking along, and I was walking between all these hearing people, and I would see all these everyone talking, and I was trying to navigate my way around campus, and I had a map, and people would kind of look at me funny, and I was all confused and turned around, and so I would write, and I would tell them, I'm trying to get to the registrar's office, how do I get there? And it was, of course, it made things 10 times worse because they couldn't understand my language, and I became more and more frustrated. It's important to keep in mind that I had eliminated those negative words from my vocabulary. I was going to be independent, and I was going to be a better human. So I wasn't going to be negative. I knew how to take care of myself, and I knew what I had to do, and sign the forms to do what I needed to do for school. So finally I made it to the registrar's office. I survived. I was able to do what I needed to do. One year, I also noticed that some students were scared and shocked of a deaf person. And I know that that's just part of people thinking that deaf people are handicapped and not being used to cultural exposure, and not having any deaf cultural exposure. I wasn't going to let their perceptions of a deaf person or somebody who was handicapped change what I needed to do. So I decided to keep going with what I was doing. I know that many deaf people complain that trying to communicate in the hearing world is a big problem because people don't know the language, they don't understand the laws, they don't know that it's important to advocate for yourself. It's important if you have a problem to think positive, to think of another way to communicate. Find a way that works for you. I stuck a notepad and a pen in my paper when I was in school. This helped me to better communicate with others who didn't know my language. It's important for deaf kids to take classes such as deaf studies and deaf history, so they understand that deaf people are successful and they can have good lives. It's good exposure for deaf children. It's important for deaf children to also have role models, people that they can look up to. And growing up, I had no idea how rich the deaf community really was. I was just a boy myself. There was a lot I didn't know. I decided that I was going to go back to NTID for 1 year to teach acting classes. But I wasn't sure if that was right for me. I wasn't sure if my heart was in it. So I decided to go back to Penn State to finish my schooling. I sat with my guidance counselor and I said, I'm really not sure what I want to do. I explained my dreams and my goals, and that I wanted to help. I wanted to help deaf people be able to work in the arts, I wanted deaf people to be able to have the same experience and cultural exposure and have deaf role models. And the response I got was, what? So I was told, all right, you can teach the hearing community at Penn State. And I remembered that I could. And then I remembered from an article I had read in the library from my favorite person that he was a hearing person. He was a deaf person who taught the hearing world. And I thought, I can do that. That's perfect for me. So I went ahead and I applied for my PhD, and I got accepted. And I was a doctoral student. And as an actor, I can teach, and I preferred art. So I got in, so I was in, and I was very interested in working on my PhD, and I got in. I finished, that was good. And I met my old teacher. And I was really motivated, and I knew that this was going to be a challenging task. I knew that getting my PhD was going to require a lot of motivation for me. And I thought, no matter what I am as a person, I have to be motivated, and I can do this. It doesn't matter any handicap or disability. I can do this. I can get my PhD. And remember, Penn State University didn't have any support for students with any sort of disabilities, didn't have any interpreters. And how I found support was there was support in the newspaper. There was a post in the newspaper, and I was able to find it that way. And I was very fortunate that they paid for my interpreter. So we had to coordinate our schedules so that we could all work together. And of course, I had to work with some of these interpreters, and there were new signs for art. So it was a challenge for not only myself but also the interpreters. All right, so we'd sit down with the hearing teacher, and they would learn sign, and we would sit down and work together. And I could teach hearing students in the class. There was one time, the first day, I went into class. I was the only person, and I was there early. And I wrote my name on the board, and all the normal first day teacher stuff. I was waiting for the other students to come in and sit down. 30, 40 students came in. And I was nervous. I never taught hearing students before. It was a new experience for me. Working with an interpreter, and I was anxious, and there was a lot going on, and I was dependent on the interpreter, and this meant a lot of things had to go right. And the interpreter looked sick, and I drew a face on the board, and the interpreter, their face matched, and they looked sick, and the students would laugh. And I thought, this is going to be tough. And so I would write on the board, and I would act out, and the students were all amazed. Everybody was shocked. This was their first experience with a deaf teacher. So this was everybody's first time. And I gave them a syllabus and said, if you need more help, we can work with the interpreter and I, we can all work together. And my class of 30 to 40 students dwindled down to 10. That was much better. We ended up having 45 students in the classroom because the students were so excited to come in and take my class. And everyone was, the interpreter and I were just a little bit nervous, but we were able to do things. We were able to get everything all worked out. There are 3 rules. The first rule is you have to go through the interpreter to go through me, and we can all work together here. The second rule was you need to learn how to sign, at least have a basic understanding of sign language. And the third rule was that whatever we talk about stays between you and I and the interpreter.